Good morning, Africa. Good morning, Nigeria. Welcome to today's newspaper review. We'll start with the Vanguard newspaper. On the Vanguard newspaper, a story on page 5 of the Vanguard newspaper, we have outrage greets EFCC's freezing of Osun government's account. You can find that full story on page 5 of Vanguard newspaper. Still on the Vanguard newspaper, at the upper side of the Vanguard newspaper, we have federal government orders payment of civil servants outstanding wage award before August 15th. You can find the full story on page 8 of the Vanguard newspaper. Another story making headlines on the Vanguard newspaper, federal government to deepen consultations with Catholic bishops, said by the SGF. You can find that full story on page 8 of the Vanguard newspaper. WAEC releases 2026 results as 1.2 million candidates pass English and Maths. You can find the full story on page 9 of the Vanguard newspaper. Another story making headlines on the Vanguard newspaper, MTN hits 3 trillion naira revenue, reinvest 1.6 trillion naira in networks. You can find the full story on page 9 of the Vanguard newspaper. Another story on the Vanguard newspaper, corruption claims police accountability inside the VDM AIG Jimo saga. You can find that on page 7 of the Vanguard newspaper. Moving away from the Vanguard newspaper to the Tribune newspaper, we have anger as EFCC freezes Osun government accounts. You can find that on page 3 of the newspaper. Still on that newspaper, we have troops rescued 308 adopted in Kwara and Niger. You can find that on page 5 of the newspaper. At the upper left of the same newspaper, we have Nigeria's domestic economy expanded by 3.87% in 2025, said by CBN. You can find the full story on page 7 of the newspaper. Still on that newspaper, at the bottom side of the newspaper, making headlines, we have national challenges, federal government to forge stronger partnership with Catholic bishops and other stakeholders, said by Akume. Federal government to forge stronger partnership with Catholic bishops, other stakeholders. You can find that full story on page 15 of the same newspaper. Still on that same newspaper, at the bottom of the newspaper, we have malaria still affecting newborns in Nigeria, said by the Health. You can find that full story on page 5 of the newspaper. Moving away from that newspaper to the Punch newspaper. Tinubu hails military as 308 Kwara and Niger adoptees rescued. You can find that on page 7 of the Punch newspaper. Making headlines on the Punch newspaper, NBA falls EFCC as Osun account freeze Parks rule. You can find that full story on page 2 of the Punch newspaper. Still on the Punch newspaper, we have WAEC results reveal how 38.5% failed the 5 key subjects. You can find the full story on page 9 of the newspaper. Moving away from the Punch newspaper to the Daily Trust newspaper, we have a story making headlines here. Protest in Lagos and Abuja over insecurity and hardship. You can find the full story on page 6 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Still on the Daily Trust newspaper, we have how 3 brothers guiding Plateau village were killed. You can find the full story on page 31 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Still on the Daily Trust newspaper, at the bottom side, we have how 4 passengers burned to death in Abuja Lokoja road crash. You can find that on page 20 of the newspaper. Still making headlines on the Daily Trust newspaper, at the upper side of the Daily Trust newspaper, we have WAEC records 61% pass rate, withholds 167,486 results. You can find that full story on page 8 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Lastly, for the Daily Trust newspaper, we have presidency to deepen consultations with Catholic bishop and others, said by Onaye Khan. You can find that on page 8 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Moving away from the Daily Trust newspaper to the Matrix newspaper, we have Tinubu ready to strengthen ties with Catholic bishop and others. You can find that full story on the page 2 of the Matrix newspaper. At the upper side of the Matrix newspaper, we have NUPRC eyes over $30 billion investment from 22 offshore projects. You can find the full story on page 3 of the Matrix newspaper. Still making headlines on the Matrix newspaper, we have Nollywood actress Temitope Osoba dies after cancer battle. We have the full story on page 23 of the Matrix newspaper. At the bottom side of the Matrix newspaper, we have Betis beats Arsenal as Gunners stumble to first pre-season defeat. You can find that sports news on page 25 of the Matrix newspaper. Still at the bottom of the Matrix newspaper, we have Tinubu hails rescue of 308 Niger and Kwara kidnap victims. You can find that on page 2 of the Matrix newspaper. Moving away from the Matrix newspaper to the Daily Sun newspaper, we have from WAEC 2026, performance dips as 61.54% secure 5 credits in English and Maths. You can find that full story on page 27 of the Daily Sun newspaper. At the upper right of the Daily Sun newspaper, we have Tinubu ready to deepen dialogue with Catholic bishops, said by Akume. You can find the full story on page 6 and page 26 of the Daily Sun newspaper. Still on the Daily Sun newspaper, we have Air Peace boss Onyema cautions unions on plot to shut down airlines. You can find the full story on page 25 of the Daily Sun newspaper. Still on the Daily Sun newspaper, we have presidency links Dangote refinery export boom. Indigenous oil due to Tinubu's economic reforms. You can find the full story on page 25 of the newspaper. Still on the Daily Sun newspaper, making headlines, we have Osun government cries foul, heads to court over frozen bank accounts by EFCC. You can find the full story on page 6 of the Daily Sun newspaper. Lastly, for the Daily Sun newspaper at the bottom, we have Tinubu has stabilized economy, said by Kalu. You have the full story on page 8 of the Daily Sun newspaper. Moving away from the Daily Sun newspaper to the last newspaper we have for today's newspaper review is the Leadership newspaper. Making headlines on the Leadership newspaper, Tinubu applauds rescue of 308 Kwara and Niger kidnap victims. You can find that full story on page 4 of the Leadership newspaper. Another story on the Leadership newspaper at the upside, Osun government account frozen over alleged 11 billion naira fraud, said by EFCC. You can find the full story on page 7 of the newspaper. Another story on the Leadership newspaper is President willing to forge stronger partnership with Catholic bishop. You can find the full story on page 4 of the newspaper. Still on the newspaper, we have community policing, key to tackling insecurity across Nigeria. You can find the full story on page 7 of the newspaper. Still on that same newspaper, we have soldiers hail salary increment, seek review of allowances. You can find that full story on page 8 of the newspaper. NDIC settles 700,000 Heritage Bank customers, begin payments to 46 failed microfinance banks depositors. You can find the full story on page 7 of the newspaper. And lastly, on this newspaper, 61.54% of candidates obtain 5 credits as WAEC releases 2026 WAEC results. And that is the end for our newspaper review. We hope you stay with us for the day. Thank you.